built for this.
How do you do it? Juggle everything, your job, your kid?
Honestly, it's not easy. They're like little monsters sometimes.
There's an incredible challenge to actually thread a really fine needle here. On the one hand, you have to interact with all these sounds, these fan expectations, all these elements. Talk about bringing Ultraman to life on a musical basis.
That's a great question. One of the first challenges was how do I honor the legacy of Ultraman? We knew that 4-note theme, da 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 da, we knew that needed to be in our film. But at the same time, as was, it didn't translate into modern scoring. It was just so cheerful. And how could I make that sound epic and modern without sounding like I was trying to do that, without trying to sound like it was changing, and yet also make it my own? And so one of the first things I did was I did a few treatments of the theme, and I would send, because it was the beginning of the pandemic, I would just send all these iPhone videos to Shannon where I kind of explained what I was trying to do with the theme and then played it just over some really early storyboards of Ultraman Rising, this film. And then he, without my knowing, sent it to Tsuburaya and said that they seemed really, really pleased by it. And that was that was actually a very big moment for me. It was sort of like, okay, I now have official permission. I didn't mess this up. Now I have a little bit of flexibility to really write the rest of the score and know exactly when to bring that theme back and then when to make it something new and different.
Because you're doing these small themes, one of the things we talked about, it's these small themes, these 4 or 5 note, it lends itself very well to doing pentatonic nonsense. You had, there's a guitarishness to the score. Obviously that you have a guitar player, which I'd love to hear about, but it sounds like you're doing something both orchestral, but very much rooted on stringed instruments between the guitar and the harp. Just wondering if you could talk about that central focus and how you saw that as a way into telling this supposedly simple musical story, but with a great deal of complexity as it gets built upon.
You're good. These are good questions. So it was really important to ground the entire score, which had so many different elements, from guitar, 8-bit, modern tech synth, Japanese voice synthesizers, taiko drums, a hugely important element to this score. I needed to ground it all in one instrument that sort of rooted it in the family and really spoke to just the tender intimacy of the story. Like behind the mask, behind the scale, behind the fight scenes and the explosions and all of that stuff is this like shockingly, I mean, he based it on Kramer versus Kramer. There's this, I mean, honestly, this intimate story. And so the harp kept pulling me in. So that is the harp tells the core emotional story of the family in such a loving and affectionate and warm way. And then when you take it away, it's that much more painful, right? Because that's the family that was ripped away from Onda, the antagonist. In terms of writing guitaristically, I grew up as a guitarist. It was my first instrument. And it's interesting that you picked up on that, because I wasn't planning on writing for the guitar until I heard Tim Henson and knew that he was game for joining
Tim Henson,
in.
For those who might not know.
Yeah, so Tim Henson is one of the 2 twin dragon guitar gods of this band Polyphony that was starting to become incredibly popular 2020, 2021. And he just makes the guitar sound like a modern instrument in a way that I don't think had been done since, I mean, you know, Rage Against the Machine, and then before that, Eddie Van Halen. You know, there are these instrumentalists that come and just make it sound different, and he makes it sound super heroic. So we started collaborating. It was really fun, just me and Tim, sending ideas back and forth, and he just elevated all of the super heroic moments of the film. He really makes him sound like, you know, because Ken is a rock star, and he's a superhero, and just the second you hear Tim play on the score, it just he conveys that.
There's a triumphalism of the distorted guitar. It serves the way that trumpets would in a normal sort of clarion call. And on the other hand, you have moments that are incredibly quiet, incredibly intimate, and you're balancing this constantly. You could have the loudest moments and some of the quietest musical moments, and vice versa. You have the guitar at some of the most intimate moments. Just nailing that right. How much of a challenge was it through the process to paint the right colors?
I think the hardest scene and the one that most needed to be unlocked was, it was originally the prologue until there was a prologue to the prologue. It's the flashback, the only time we see mother, father, son of Ken and his two parents when he was a child in their home. It's the only time we see the three of them together. And I just wanted it to be so warm and so loving and just kind of hug the audience. At the same time, we meet Gigantron and we meet Dr. Onda. And we know that Dr. Onda's wife and child are about to be killed. Actually, we don't know in the first scene, but I need to set that up musically. And so I need in that scene to go from this beautiful scene of making ramen together and watching a baseball game to suddenly meeting the most terrifying kaiju of them all, to set up this trauma, this family trauma, and then I pull it back. And it took that was probably the hardest scene to really nail. I kind of redid it. I don't think it only took me a few days, but over those few days, I redid it like 6 or 7 times until I got those turns right.
And last question for the true music nerds. There's a major minor thing you do. You actually create this melodic element, and then by dropping in a semitone, you're actually creating a minor discord. So you're going from something that seems very positive to then something just slightly negative, or at least strange or ethereal,
Yes.
or maybe even more in tone with Japanese pentatonic music. I'm just wondering if you could talk about putting in these audio Easter eggs, but still working on a more general audience.
Well, I had this idea that all of the major characters, because they are all in the story defined by their role within a family, including Onda's, who had his family ripped from him. So Onda's role is first and foremost the person whose family was destroyed. And so I wanted his theme to be the family theme, which you hear everywhere else. But I moved one semitone of the 4 notes together to take it from major to actually a Japanese pentatonic scale called the In scale, which has a very complex, I wouldn't say it's sad or even negative, but it's something that elevates and adds gravitas and complexity to his character. And that's just a fun, I think it's correct to call it an Easter egg, but when you play these themes over and when you weave them together, I do think that we're operating on a kind of an unconscious level story-wise to help. The score is trying to tell you something. And I think even if you're not listening to the intervals, I don't want you to be noticing the intervals I'm using, but these things are painting a picture sort of in your unconscious as we're telling the story. And if people get to the end of the story and realize that Onda was sacrificing his own life to be reunited with his family and to protect Tokyo, and his character is complex and relatable, I feel like I played a small role in that.
Amazing to take an E to an E flat to change our mood.
That's what I love music for.
Thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on the score.
You bet.